Hi, welcome to Imarticus Learnings. In the continued sessions for business analysis, today I have a very interesting and a very exciting topic for you. It's called stakeholder management. Essentially, it's about managing some people, which are key people, which are very influencing in our project, which either directly or indirectly do contribute in many ways. How large or how small is the participation, you can never rule out how much impact it may have on your project and on your performance as a business analyst. So this means we need to figure out these people. This means we need to know them, understand them, because these are the people from whom the origin of the requirements is going to be. And we know that as business analysts, our mainline job is going to be to take out the requirements in the rightest perspective, in the rightest view, and the rightest dimension, because that's the whole KPI of the story. And in order to do that, we need to know these people. Well, the word was always about knowing people so that we can do the work right. But in business analyst's word, it just assumes a very critical dimensions as well. So let's explore those dimensions and try to know and understand that how is the way to go forward as a business analyst in a large world which is managed by very different stakeholders. So they are the key players and we are one of the small players. So how as a small player we still wriggle out the entire perspective from a larger world is the right story which we need to begin from here. Stakeholders. So who are they? How do we define them? Are they internal? Are they external? Are they on the periphery? Or are they in the nucleus of the whole thing? The answer to this question is very simple. They could be anywhere. It's like a large radar, where a small blip can come from anywhere. This blip or a flash can be from any of the stakeholders, which we always knew as a stakeholder. It could be from anyone whom we never thought could be a stakeholder. So first of all, of course, we identify these stakeholders. That's done in a formal way, many times in an informal way. As you must have understood by now, that business analysis, like many of the other things, is also a good mix of science and art. The science here is about the empirical part, which is more statistical, which is more quantitative. The art is more about qualitative, it's more about being imaginative, because then the reason is that there are people involved. And wherever there are people involved, there's a people management. And people management comes in multi-forms. It's more multi than science actually. And hence, the business analyst needs to behave and act in a similar way. The discussions needs to be congenial. You need to just strike the right chord with the stakeholder. You need to talk to a stakeholder on the same turf on which he's standing. You as a business analyst needs to come across as a person which knows that turf. This means when you interact with these people, you need to be sure what industry, what business process they are talking about. And that's how a pre-read comes in very handy. So these guys could be defined in the project very formally. They could be not so defined, maybe more informally. They can directly contribute to your project. They may be somebody who's behind the bench, who's behind the curtain, but he can still pull some cords. So in many interconnected ways, a business analyst is always related to a stakeholder. These stakeholders assume different dimensions. Some could be from purely external world, that's the business world, and that's the client side. From client side, you may interact with the CIO, he could be a stakeholder. You could interact with the chief sponsor of the whole project. He is, of course, a big stakeholder. You could interact with just a regional director. He's very important from operations side. You could interact with just a small business user sitting in a small godown. He's also your stakeholders. And the reason being, as we do a bottoms-up approach to build the requirements, we see that throughout the value chain, most of these people are connected to those requirements in a smaller way or in a bigger way. But unlike a very hierarchical world, in this world of requirements, the interconnectivity is very much there. Because even there may not be too much of a consensus, for example, but because the requirements are so connected via the stakeholders, that unless one affirms that, the other's response is not going to be affirmative as well. Hence, your need to remain connected, to stay connected, to assuage their feelings, to get their nerve center, and then to pinpoint what is the best requirement which suits the need of everyone. A requirement which deems fit within the overall ecosystem and for which everybody will have a consent. So that's what the mainline job of a BA is. What is stakeholder management? It's just the process of managing some expectations. But isn't this word about managing expectations? And if you're able to do it well, you always come across as a very worthy professional. And the word of stakeholder is not very different either. It's about managing their expectations, more importantly, so that you are able to reach the right objectives and deliver the right outcomes. And come on, let's agree on that. Who isn't so very happy whose expectations you have managed? And sometimes these expectations could be very large. It could be complex. But then you will be able to do them only when you are able to understand your stakeholder. And that's exactly what we intend to do here. Stakeholders, like most of us, may not also like the change. So when a business analyst enters their world, a business analyst comes with a certain background and he is normally able to suggest some changes. And so the as-is word of the stakeholders goes into a slight to be. So some of them will be very consensual to going towards that change, learn that change, adapt to it. But in many cases, some stakeholders may not really fancy the same ideas. So then the next job of a BA is, opposed to understanding the requirement, is to understand the change management process, a word in which you will have to make the new stakeholders adapt congenially so that the right consent of everything comes in. Because you can always do a project scientifically correct, but till the time there's a human affirmative action for the same, your project is never a success, right? So that's the same case here in terms of business analysis as well. So you may ask me, why do we need a change? You're not managing just systems here. Oh, come on, it's not just about changing a software for a more efficient process. It's about managing human beings, and human beings are made up of all sorts of people. So that's why a business analysis is also called a master artful program of managing those emotions as well. Why do we need to manage? Some of the stakeholders might see you as a welcome change. They might welcome you and they give their best cooperation for you. But some of them might perceive you as a threat because you are trying to bring a change into their world in which they never lived in. And others wouldn't really even care less about it. So you have to just make sure that you keep their interest on so that they are able to provide you what you really need from them. In the stakeholder management process, we need to first identify the stakeholders. We need to do their analysis. Oh yes, there is an analysis of stakeholders, just like the way we analyze, for example, a process. We create a stakeholder matrix, and that's some kind of a soft power map in terms of their influence, positive or negative, on the project. And accordingly, we have to maneuver this change so that the net effect is always positive. The next part of the story is stakeholder engagement, in which you need to engage with them in a certain defined way, a defined mode, armed with certain tools and techniques so that you are effective. Of course, all this is backed by a certain communication information and a statistical program as well, in which there's a regular interval or at which at a certain frequency you release certain communication towards them. You keep them engaged, you keep rooted onto them, you keep them hooked onto yourself and to the project and how the evolution of the project is happening. And for all that, a very diligent BA is required, trust me. And hence, our constant endeavor to enable you in the same way. The key question here is, who is threatening the project, for example? Who is so dependent and not so dependent on this project? Has there been a similar project in the market? And if there was, to what extent did it succeed? What is the way in which this change is perceived by the stakeholders, including the legal, the mandatory, not so mandatory, the customary, not so customary, and all that kind of thing, which eventually tumbles up into a stakeholder perspective. So as a BA, you live in and out of this kind of a world. Let me give you a few examples. Project manager, the one who's responsible to manage the project within scope and schedule, obviously he's a very important stakeholder, and he's most of the time an internal stakeholder. There are customer users, people who actually is going to end up using that functionality for which you are doing an analysis from a business perspective, obviously he's be a very important part for you, because tomorrow post go live, he's the one who's actually going to use the functionality and feedback. There is a performing organization, the overall throbbing enterprise, whose employees are obviously most directly involved in work of this kind of a project. There's a project management team, oh yes, the team which is responsible to actually execute the overall project management activities and keep the pivotal point in control. There's a sponsor from the client side who's able to find the resources and the funds in cash or in kind for this project. Influencers. Looks like a subtle word, but these are the group of people who may not be directly related to the project in a stakeholding perspective. But these are the guys from, for example, the industry, who've seen this word changing, who've seen these requirements evolving, and you can never rule out the influence which they will always have in any developing project like that. There are many other types of stakeholders as well, but the fact is, probably for this session, we would like to explore more on this only as much. Thank you very much for this session.